Hello. So today we're going to be talking about what is called the rhetorical triangle. Each point on the triangle associates with a different part of the argument. So up here at the top, you have what is called ethos. Now, ethos is kind of just a fancy word for ethics, but it's a little bit more specific than just like ethics or morals in a rhetorical argument, because this is the point of the triangle that we associate with the speaker. So ethos is how the speaker is establishing their credibility. Um, you can do this in a number of ways. Maybe you use a really awesome vocabulary to let everyone know that you are a smart, kind of scholarly person, and so you have authority to speak on this subject. Maybe you don't use like big vocabulary words. Maybe you just use vocabulary that is specific to your field. That's also called jargon. If you are in the military, for example, and you know all the great acronyms, or great, I don't know, you know all the acronyms that you're supposed to use, and you know all the terms that you're supposed to use in that field, then that gives you a kind of credibility. There's all sorts of ways to build credibility. Maybe you could build credibility because you have personal experience with the subject. If you are maybe one of the people that is most affected by your argument, or your childhood had to do with this argument. If we look at Trevor Noah, that's a lot of how he builds ethos, is by just having lived it. So we are going to trust him as a credible source, right? So ethos is all about author credibility. If you go down here, you see logos. Logos, it's a word for logic in Greek. And basically, this is the way that you have set up your argument to be reasonable and logical. This is your use of evidence and facts and rationality. Maybe you're just connecting pieces together in a way that seems well researched, and it seems like you are getting to an inevitable conclusion. That's logos. So if we are thinking of this point up here as the speaker, this point down here is the actual content of your argument, the pieces of your argument and how they add up together. Over here we have pathos. Some people say pathos, some people say pathos. It really doesn't matter. It's ancient Greek. Say whatever you want. But this over here is the side of the triangle that we associate with emotion. Pathos, it's related to like pathetic. It's a way of evoking a kind of emotional response in your audience. But what I want to really think about here is not just the way that the argument is emotional, but the way that the argument appeals to specific values of your audience. If you look over here, this point in the triangle is also associated with audience. Some audiences are going to respond with certain emotions that another audience would not respond to. So you can make a specific audience feel a certain way only if you know who that specific audience is. And this graph doesn't have it, but we want to imagine that there are little arrows pointing between all of these points on the triangle, because ethos is going to affect, excuse me, ethos is going to affect your logos. Logos is going to affect your ethos. Logos will affect your pathos. Pathos will affect your logos, etc. So they're all kind of working on each other to kind of like you picture it containing the argument. It's like they're taking all of these points and they are putting them inside the argument so that everything inside here might be relevant to your argument. Anything that exists outside the triangle is not relevant to your argument. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because who you are as a speaker is going to determine how you logically think about a problem. But the logic of the problem, hopefully, through the course of your research and your knowledge, is going to affect you as a person, right? The emotion of your argument and your audience is going to affect how you establish credibility. If your audience is not experts or in your field of study, then using jargon and expertise language might actually work against you for credibility because they don't know what you're talking about. Likewise, your logos, your content, the logic of your argument, is going to influence how you shape the emotions of your argument, because you need to use the emotions logically. So all of these things interact with each other. I like to think of them as almost like a soundboard, and you can turn up one and you can turn down the other, but you are never like fully muting any of them. And you can at some point have all three super high or two super high and one low. So each sentence of an argument does not contribute to one of these things on its own. One sentence might be high in pathos, but because the pathos is used effectively, it's also high in ethos and high in logos, right? So they don't work independently, they work together. And what's really good about this is that you know now, if you know who you are as an author, what your argument is, and who exactly your audience is, you know what will belong inside this triangle. But let's look at a little example here. Let's say that you are trying to make the argument that schools should be online only during the pandemic. I know this is an extremely controversial issue. This works the best with controversial issues, though, because you can totally see how some audiences are going to react to certain pieces of information more than other audiences, or in a different way than other audiences. So my argument, again, schools should be online. And that is only one part of the argument. That's the claim part of the argument. I need to have some reasons why that is true in order to have some logos here, right? If I just say school should be online and leave it at that, basically I'm holding a protest sign. Nobody's going to listen to me, right? So then my reason that I'm going to add to that claim, and I'm going to make this a very narrow, specific argument, not only because that works with my presentation here, but also because that usually works better for when you're writing arguments. You guys aren't writing book-length arguments. You're writing like 2 to 3 page arguments. So the more specific, often the better. So my reason now will be because someone will get sick. Now, I need to choose, before I go any further than that, like we should go online because someone will get sick. Before I go any further, I need to think about who my audience is. And this can be chosen in a lot of different ways. Like usually it's because you have a specific purpose in mind and you think a specific audience needs to hear this more than others. Now, in my experience, because I am a teacher online, I'm on social media and whatever, it seems like teachers are kind of, they don't want to like necessarily go online, but they're kind of on board with this argument, right? So it's not going to do me a whole lot of good to make this argument to my fellow teachers. Trust me, we are all arguing to each other all of the time. But it's not like the person I need to reach in order to like enact policy. And if I want schools to go online, that is something that I'm trying to do, right? I could talk to the community at large. Like that includes like, let's say I'm talking to the Jordan School District community, right? That would include people with kids in the school system, people with kids who are out of the school system, or, babies. That would include like people who don't have kids, that's just everybody in the community. Now that is quite a large group of people to reach with one argument. That would take a lot more work than I have space for in this thing. And I also don't know that it'll be the most effective because that's such a large group of people, the community at large. I don't know how I'm going to like reach all of them and manipulate their emotions in the way that I want to, right? So I think the group of people that this will make the most sense to direct this argument towards are parents. And parents with kids in the school system, because they're the ones who are going to be, besides the teachers and the students themselves, parents are the ones that are going to be the most effective. And, parents are the ones who vote for the school board. And so parents are probably the ones that are going to have the most control in this argument. So if I'm really wanting to convince them that schools should be online only right now, I'm trying to convince I'm trying to actually make schools online only, I should probably direct this argument at parents with kids in the school system. So then I am trying to establish my credibility with these parents. I'm a teacher. I'm not a health expert. I don't have that kind of expertise, but what I can do is to establish credibility is kind of pull on their emotional strings to try to get them to listen to me. So when I say someone is going to get sick, I think I can make that more specific so that it will affect my audience in the greatest way possible, right? So think about all the people people involved in the school system and think about who could get sick by being at school, right? Teachers, that's one group that could get sick. And I'm not trying to be cynical here, but if I'm thinking about who is going to kind of evoke the most emotion from my parents, teachers might not be the best choice. Because, so like my parents' audience here, right? They might know teachers personally, and that would affect them, right? But they might not. There aren't that many teachers, right, in their community, and so it might be that teachers, if you can see my mouse here, like teachers might be outside the scope of this argument because it's not going to reach my audience to its fullest potential. Likewise, I could say community members could get sick. There could be community spread. Now that might affect my audience quite a lot because they are part of the community, right? But is that going to have the highest amount of pathos that I can get? And in order to decide that, I need to think, what does my audience value? My audience of parents with kids in the school system, well, they seem to value education, right? Because they have kids in public school system, like that seems to be something that they actually think highly of, right? They seem to value, like parents in my community, they seem to value their kids. That seems to be the thing that they would value the very most. And I'm not saying that it is wrong. Of course you should value your kids more than the kind of anonymous teacher that you don't really know at the school, right? So it's totally understandable that a parent's highest priority would be their child, and that I can, as a writer, I can manipulate that knowledge. I can take that knowledge that I understand that parents care about their kids most out of anybody else, and I can tailor my argument so that it makes the most emotional impact. And because I'm going to acknowledge what their values are, it also gives me credibility as a what we would say a rhetor, a person who is using rhetoric, right? And so that's what I'm going to then fold into my argument. I'm going to say we should go online only during this pandemic because your kids are going to get sick. And then I have kind of reached each point on my rhetorical triangle, and I have contained it within like inside that triangle to get the most impact from my argument. Now, if I take a step back, the real reason that I want to make this argument is just to go online, right? And it includes all those reasons. Teachers will get sick, there will be community spread, and students might get sick, right? But I don't need to discuss all of those things because I am just looking for what is contained here, and the audience as a big part of what is contained inside this triangle. So this is the rhetorical triangle. You can see how they all kind of work on each other, and you can use this when you are evaluating arguments as well. You can think about how an author has an audience in mind and has used that audience to shape the way that they establish themselves as credible and the actual message, the actual argument that they present. So we're going to practice that. If you go back last week when we did it with your Instagram photos or your social media photos, we are going to practice that now with your photos again.